Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak in this debate on defence. It's a great privilege to do so. I'm not a minister, to echo the remarks of the member for North Wiltshire, but I am a former serviceman and hope to bring some value perhaps as a practitioner to what we're discussing this evening. We know that the first duty of any government is the defence of its people. That is quite clear, and therefore the need to keep people safe is non-discretionary. Right now, we've got war raging across Europe, not too far away, and multiple threats are proliferating right across the globe. And given that the landscape internationally is probably more dangerous, unstable and incendiary now than at any time since World War II, defence spending is absolutely essential. Because voters do care about their security, many are nervous about what's happening across the world, but most importantly, it's our duty as politicians to keep them safe. This is why the government's commitment to a defence budget equal to 2.5% of GDP by 2030 is so important, both strategically and politically. And as a member of the UN Security Council, the UK's continued role as a bastion of global rights and democracy can only be underpinned by hard power. And it is a reality of history that we may yet be called upon to protect our own security and that of our allies. And just to add further to that, we know that the Defence Secretary has recently increased military aid to Ukraine, securing an extra £700 million, and thereby taking Britain's total contribution beyond £3 billion. It's a lot of money. So we are doing our bit. Well, in terms of the 2.5%, it's extra money, we know that, but the issue is what we do with it and how we spend it, and that's really important. So I'm going to advocate, Minister, that we need a capability audit right now. And the reason why I'm saying that is because with the extra injection of funds, we need to work out now what we can now do. And when I was working at Northwood many years ago at the Joint Headquarters, we had this thing called the JOKER, the Joint Operational Estimate of Capability of Readiness. And in my view, with the extra money we've got now, we should be turning all of those capabilities that are flashing red to green. In other words, plug those capability gaps, not just on land, sea and air, but also space and cyber. Yes, state-of-the-art platforms are fine. And yes, we must procure weapons that we know we can beat our adversaries. But it's also about spending wisely and smartly when necessary. My second point with the 2.5% is that we need to better operate what we already have so that every part of our lexicon works. We must not rely on that exquisite exclusivity that we've spoken so much about. We must make sure that all of our platforms work and can be sustained across the battle space. In terms of equipment generally, as one part of capability, we need to procure what we need and nothing more. And it's about strategic lift as well as the exquisite exclusivity. If we haven't got the ships or the ro-ro ferries or the strategic lift, the C-17s, the 400Ms, to get equipment and people right across the globe, then it's no point having the kit in the first place. And therefore, it's about enabling expeditionary reach. You can't put boots on the ground if you can't get the boots there. Plus, Minister, it's about logistic tail. It's about spares, the supply chain. It's about sustainment. It's about defence contractors, and it's about delivery, and it's about munitions. So we've got to be really, really careful that if we buy it, we've got to be able to use it and then fight it through. And it must be sustainable and enduring. And of course, a platform is an interesting word. A platform is the platform. It's the platform on which capability sits, but it's also what you put on that platform that matters. I therefore favour a modular approach for future equipment programmes whereby we can apply different degrees of mobility, firepower and protection, but it's the kit that you bolt on and bolt off which really matters, and that's the battle-winning equipment for me. So for me it's about a commonality of platforms, it's about spares, it's about logistics, it's about interoperability, it's about cannibalisation. If you run out of something, can we get it? With complex platforms and complex supply chains, we can't. Therefore, let's please go for modular and let's go for commonality. Please do.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member. Is he aware of the Supercat range of vehicles that operate in much the way that he's described?
I thank the member for his intervention. I'm very aware of Supercat. I've visited down in your neck of the woods. It's a very, very impressive company. It's a British company. And yes, we need to do more to make sure that Supercat produces and builds what we need, and let's work with them a bit more on that. So the member's right, it's about fewer variants, it's about easier supply chain, it's also about not having equipment that is too complex to use or to maintain. That's very important. Keep it cheap, simple and easy. As for NATO, very briefly, it is the only show in town, we know that. It is the umbrella for European security in the North Atlantic. We've now got 32 countries, and that's to be welcomed. And of course, NATO has responded magnificently to Ukraine in terms of the aggression of Putin. It's galvanised the alliance since Putin's invasion of Ukraine in a way that he could not possibly have conceived. And therefore, in many ways, NATO is much stronger because of what's happened. And Article 5 is the prize for NATO membership. It has defined Putin's actions, in my view, so far in Ukraine, that he has not attacked a NATO country. Why? He's worried about Article 5, and that strategic uncertainty is really important, and it underpins our security in Europe. However, there are issues with NATO, and I want to cover these very briefly. Firstly, only 18 of the 32 member countries are currently committed to 2% of GDP. That is not enough. And in addition, the 5 non-EU members of NATO, namely the USA, UK, Canada, Turkey and Norway, contribute 80% of the operating budget. That is outrageous. With 96% of the EU effectively reliant upon NATO for its security. That is a really stark contrast. So what? Europe must therefore become much more responsible for its own security. That is non-discretionary. Please do.
Does the Honourable Gentleman share the concerns that some of us have, including myself, of Trump's comments, if he is the next President of the United States? He may not be, but if he is, where if NATO don't up their commitment to 3%, then the United States of America will withdraw and reduce their commitment. Is Trump a danger?
It's not for me to endorse Trump in this chamber, but what I would say is that to a certain extent he's right. And I think it's absolutely right that Europe must take on more responsibility for its own security to allow the USA then to worry about parts of the world that NATO won't be worried about necessarily. And it's really important in my view to make sure that the USA is not overly committed in Europe for that same reason. We know that NATO in Europe massively overmatches Russia. But we need to get to the point also strategically where Europe itself overmatches Russia, to reinforce my point. Therefore, leaving the USA, as I mentioned, to focus on parts of the world where it needs to. Beyond NATO, and this is a really important point, the Minister as well, the UK has a global footprint that extends beyond NATO. We've discussed NATO a lot this evening, but it's not just about NATO. East of Suez, where we've not had a presence for quite some time, we've now got bases in Bahrain, Diego Garcia, we've always had that, and of course Oman. And it's really important that for the UK to be that bastion of global democracy, that we've got that reach across the far side of the globe. We've also got operating bases in Cyprus, Gibraltar, Falklands, Ascension and DG again. And I mention that because it's really important that we look after these bases. If we withdraw from, for example, Diego Garcia, then that's a part of the world that we can no longer cover with our strategic reach. And therefore we need to be very, very careful what we wish for politically. And it's imperative that the UK is able to fulfil its global commitments in the Middle East with carrier strike, in the Falklands, West Africa, in the Red Sea, the Caribbean, the Baltic, North Atlantic. The list goes on. We are not just focused on NATO. Therefore, it's really important that our defence capabilities extend beyond the North Atlantic and fulfil our global responsibilities. You only have to look right now at where UK forces are deployed to realise how important that global footprint actually is. Dean Acheson, the US Secretary of State, very famously said, Britain has lost an empire, but it has not yet found a role. Well, we clearly do have that role. We've seen that this evening in this debate, and it's very important that we are resourced and funded to be able to fill that role into perpetuity. And also, lastly, what numbers should the armed forces be? Lots of debate about, the army being cut, or is 72,000 enough? The size of the Navy, the size of the RAF. Well, the answer is that the forces must be big enough to do the job that they are tasked to do. The answer, therefore, lies in defence tasks. This idea of having an army of a certain size or a navy of a certain size, it's pie in the sky. We've got to be able to resource it, we know that. But the important thing is our forces have to be able to meet defence tasks. We don't have enough ships, we know that. We need more frigates and more destroyers. Quantity has a quality all of its own. We've got state-of-the-art equipment in the RAF, C-17s, A400M, P3, F-35B, Typhoon and Tempest to come, but do we have enough of those platforms? And of course with the Army, well, of course, as I keep being told by constituents, well, Mr. Sunderland, the Army can't fight Russia. Well, of course, the British Army is unlikely to be fighting Russia on its own. It's called NATO. And we know that NATO does have approximately 3 million troops to call upon. And we know also that NATO overmatches Russia in Europe. Therefore, we need to play our part in NATO, not necessarily perplexed about what we used to be able to do. And the UK does need to be able to retain autonomous and unilateral forces to support NATO and the other tasks, as we mentioned. So we can't afford to be harder over on numbers. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, 2.5%, yes, the right thing to do, but it must keep rising to meet the threat. Do we need more ships? Yes, we do. A bigger army? Perhaps. Is NATO fundamental to our future? It absolutely is. Trident? Unequivocally, yes. We need to invest in it and reinforce it. And it gives us a seat at the UN Security Council, which is really important. Do we need to focus on autonomous and remote platforms? Absolutely, yes. Cyber and space. We've got 5 domains now, not 3. We've got to invest in those much more, as we saw today. We need to invest in precision capabilities. We need to have better training, better activity, more training, more exciting activity and opportunities that keep people in and that attract them to stay in. Richard Branson famously said, we need to train our people so well that they can leave, but treat them so well that they don't want to. But with the Minister in his place as well, I would urge him, please, to think about wokery, not too much of it, please, in the armed forces. We've got a job to do still. Dumbing down of standards, absolutely no. We've got to set the bar and maintain that bar because discipline depends upon it. And the divisive new accommodation model, no thank you. Thank you.
Bob C.